Dan and Amy. Amy, you know what's great about the whole Paris Accord discussion and extending on to rehashing the climate change debate, which has captivated the interest of about 2% of the American population. You get to hear from Al Gore again.
Oh, I know he's back.
Yeah.
And he's better than ever. A little puffy, a little grayer, but he's abiding by all the rules.
I think the massages help. He was on with Jake Tapper, and he addressed the criticism that he's received that Al Gore, are you ready for this? May be a bit of a hypocrite with respect to wagging his finger at the lives other people live while he lives a very ritzy life with a big carbon footprint. And he responded straight away to Al Gore.
Yeah, well, I don't have a private jet, and what the carbon emissions come from my trips on Southwest Airlines are offset. I live a carbon-free lifestyle to the maximum extent possible.
He doesn't need a private jet because Eric Schmidt lets him borrow his. Here's the thing. I mean,
that's awesome. He's not alcohol-free or drug-free, but he's carbon-free.
He's not totally carbon-free. If he was totally carbon-free, he wouldn't exist, which I would support. But here's the thing. Gore has 4 homes.
Yeah.
They got this compound in Montecito. They've got this huge mansion. Well, they don't because Tipper left him, but one of the two does. They bought them. Huge place in Tennessee, of course. There was the stories about this place in Tennessee, $30,000 a year in utility bills, right? You remember this? Yeah, carbon-free lifestyle does Al Gore live. That's fun.
That is funny.
All right, now let's...
Also,
go ahead.
Nikki Haley, she was on, the UN ambassador to the U.S., was on to defend... U.S. ambassador to the UN, thank you. To respond and to tell people how President Trump really feels about the climate. Guys, listen up. He cares.
President Trump believes the climate is changing, and he believes pollutants are part of that equation. So that is the fact. That is where we are. That's where it stands. He knows that that it's changing. He knows that the U.S. has to be responsible with it, and that's what we're going to do. Just because we got out of a club doesn't mean that we don't care about the environment.
Exactly.
There it is.
And you know who echoed that point that Nikki Haley just made is somebody who actually believes in climate change and believes that man is the primarily responsible for climate change, believes it's a serious thing. This is a Danish academic named Bjorn Lomborg, not to be confused with Lumberg from Office Space.
Okay. Oh,
different
thank you.
person.
Okay.
Not a Gary Cole character. This is a real professor from Denmark who also runs a nonprofit called the Copenhagen Consensus Center. He was on a podcast with Nick Gillespie over at the Reason Foundation. Here's what he had to say about the Paris Accord.
Paris Climate Accord. Tell us why it's a good thing that the United States has decided to rethink its participation.
So fundamentally, the 2 things you need to know about the Paris Agreement is, 1, it is not going to do very much to tackle climate. So if you look at the UN's own estimate, if everyone had delivered everything they had promised, including Trump and the U.S., by 2030, the Paris Agreement would have delivered less than 1% of what it's promising. So very, very tiny impact on climate.
So it leaves 99% of the problem it says it's going to solve in place.
So the second thing is it's incredibly costly. It's probably the most costly treaty ever to be signed in history. So if you look at what is the likely cost across the main areas where we have good estimates, it indicates that it's probably around $1 trillion in cost if you do it in the most effective way. That means with carbon taxes in all the relevant regions. And if you don't, which is typically the way you do climate policy, it could easily be $2 trillion. So $1 to $2 trillion a year for the rest of the century, mostly in lost GDP growth. And the net benefit at the end of the century, even if you're very optimistic, will to have been reduced the temperature by about 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit. So spend $100 trillion to achieve virtually no climate benefit. That's a bad deal.
It's pretty succinct analysis. One other point that Mark Stein made over the weekend I liked is, for the left and for the others who want to engage in this gloom and doom demagoguery that they've been engaging in for the last half century, going back to Rachel Carson and her DDT scare, which, by the way, cost millions of lives in places like South America that didn't eradicate malaria because of the the hysteria around DDT and pesticides. What Stein says, it's a lot easier to say, hey, I'm busy saving the world than it is to focus on getting involved in your school district or getting involved in your municipality, your local government, your state government. That's not glamorous. It's not sexy. There's not rallies for it. So it's a lot easier to be this globalist who's busy saving the planet than it is to do anything meaningful in the space in which you live and the community which you spend most of your time. I thought that was an excellent point as well. For more excellent points on this and other topics, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend Jimmy Pethokoukis, CNBC contributor and columnist for the American Enterprise Institute. Jim, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning, guys. How you doing?
Good morning. And so your reaction to the reactions to the Trump decision to pull out of Paris last week?
Well, I mean, listen, I'm concerned about climate change. I think it's real. I think man has a role to play. It's driving it. So, what do you do? What I would have preferred is that Trump had gone out there and, kind of affirmed that, yeah, this is a thing. It's a long-term problem, and the way we need to deal with it is not through energy scarcity, not through top-down regulations, and that's really the problem with the Obama approach, but really through innovation, through new technology, nuclear power, innovation in clean energy, that kind of thing. I don't take climate activists seriously, for instance, who just rule out nuclear power. So I think that's the kind of future. That's the kind of vision I would have preferred to see presented, and that's not what we got. Instead, we got the world laughing at us and having no coal jobs or something. So I think there was a better way to go about it. I think it's actually kind of evidence-based and forward-looking.
So don't you think the U.S., though, has a good track record on reducing greenhouse emissions and gases?
Right. I mean, fracking's helping. That's a great, listen, natural gas is a great sort of transition away from coal to hopefully cleaner energy sources in the future. Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I don't think we, I don't think we have anything to apologize for that. But, now what do we do? The best sort of clean energy source we have is nuclear. That's not going particularly well. I think there are going to be amazing, and there are amazing advances going on with solar. That's not here yet. And I think the answer is, listen, there's going to be a lot more people in the world in 100 years than there are today. So, they may, want to use a lot more energy, so we need a planet of energy abundance that is done in a way that doesn't harm the environment. And that's ultimately not going to be done through, regulations and having people use less energy. It's going to be through scientific innovation, which is what we've been doing for the past 200 years.
And I mean, Larry Arnn was on with Hugh Hewitt, Larry Arnn from Hillsdale College, and he was saying what a lot of conservatives believe, and this is consistent with what you're suggesting, Jim, is that, look, let the solar power provide some hope for growing as an energy source. So let's see where solar power can take us as part of the overall effort to be energy independent and to reduce energy costs. So it's not opposition to any of these things. It's just the need to engage in these globalist approaches that necessarily, as Trump I think rightly said, turn out to be efforts to stick up the United States for money for other places.
I mean, listen, what might else have Donald Trump said? Listen, Trump likes making big, gigantic promises, so maybe he should have said, you know what? We're not going to reduce our carbon emissions by 25%. We're going to reduce them by 50%.
Right.
We're going to double it, and here's how we're going to do it. That may have been a huge claim, and then say, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to do nuclear, big league. We're going to do a number on carbon emissions, all that kind of stuff. That's what I'd like to have heard. And maybe that wasn't the time or place for that kind of speech. I think it was. But I mean, listen, I think climate change is real. I think we need to do something about it. That something needs to be technological progress, advancement, and innovation, not a future where living standards don't go up or are stagnant because we're worried about our carbon emissions and our carbon footprints.
Well, Well, I know some people who are worried that their electric bill is going to go up now. Is that a possibility?
Going to go up now?
Yeah.
As a result of what? Nothing happened.
Well, see, here's the thing. I think that the left sometimes gets real lazy with the facts. And you got to hear this. Jimmy P., I was at Blaine-a-Palooza on Friday, and a fifth grader who wrote a whole paper on climate change was actually crying because we pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. And I said to her mom, I said, well, you need to tell...
That was no fifth grader. That was the president of the Sierra Club.
Stop it. I said, you need to tell her the fact nothing's going to happen until November 2020. And the $1 billion that we could, spend will be spent now on non-carbon energy and research. It's a better use of our money. And it's just hard for people to have processed this.
Well, look, now I can use this now to further my case when I yell at my kids to turn off the lights. So.
Exactly. Jimmy Pethokoukis, the fifth grade whisperer. Nobody knows how to calm the pre-adolescents like Jimmy P.
I mean, if you have kids crying, you need to tell them the truth to calm them down.
I believe in a non-hysterical approach to policy.
Yeah, that's a good position. So, related stories, since energy sector is an economic driver. The jobs report last week, Friday, a little underwhelming. We're not, less about the jobs number, but more just about where we are with GDP growth, right?
Yeah, listen, job growth has slowed, and in a way, that's not unexpected. I mean, we've turned out a lot of jobs for the past years. But I think one interesting thing is that whenever we've had the unemployment rate around these levels, 4.3%, like the past 3 times or the past 50 years when it's been this low, it's been followed by something bad happening, whether it's the inflation of the 70s, whether it was the internet stock bubble bursting, or the housing bubble. So usually when we've had this low, we've had something bad happen. I hope that doesn't happen this time. I think you don't see the kind of, generally, kind of crazy financial stuff happening that you would think. But listen, inflation, the unemployment rate is low. I think I would like to see the Fed not raise interest rates right now. I'd like to see what happens if you try to run the economy maybe a little hot, get more people off the sidelines. But this might be about as good as it gets. And if wages aren't going up at any sort of crazy amount, which is kind of what you might expect given that the economy is not particularly productive right now. So yeah, this could be, unless we make big, longer structural change to our economy to increase growth, this is probably about as good as it gets.
Okay, well, that's sort of an uneven way to end the interview. I'd like to end with Jimmy on a positive note. That was very middle. Very middle.
Yeah, we're stumbling into the week.
James Pethokoukis, CNBC contributor, columnist for the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for joining us, as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, gang. Bye.
And you joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.